If you think of street advertising today, it's this: garish, quick, flashy, attention-grabbing. And it has to be. After all, you've got to pull all those countless sets of eyes away from their latest apps on their phones as they pass through our streets, oblivious to what's around them. But it wasn't always like this. Once Londoners walked with their eyes raised, staring at brick after brick, and occasionally those bricks became colourful treats. Because street advertising isn't a modern invention, it was once almost an art form. They're called ghost signs, and if you look up as you travel through London today, there's still a few to be found. And now you can even go on a guided tour of them, ironically through an app on your phone. All the brainchild of ghost sign hunter and historian Sam Roberts, who first came across this one in Stoke Newington.
In about 2005 I moved house, and as a result of that I think I used to walk up this side of the street more than I'd done before when I walked up the other side of the street, and I noticed this old ghost sign, and it intrigued me for a few reasons really. One was that people even bothered to paint walls for the purposes of advertising. Second was it was faded. I thought, maybe it won't be here forever, and maybe we need to document it in some way. If we look at old historic photographs of the area, we can see that it wasn't there in the early 1920s. And that's because the stationery firm advertised, the Walker Brothers, hadn't even moved in at that point. They moved in 1924, and this sign was painted shortly after in the mid-1920s. It's got a lot of elements to it, it's got some beautiful lettering, it's even got an illustration of an old fountain pen. These signs were painted often 100 or more years ago, and the words that you find on them were never intended for our eyes or our ears, and in a sense they're just still whispering quietly away, and we're allowed to hear that if we take the time to look and listen.
You do something to me, something that simply mystifies me. Tell me, why should it be? You have the power to hypnotize me.
We can look at them in the context of local history, so we can understand about the companies that used to operate in particular areas. In Highgate, there's a building there that's got signage on 3 sides advertising a tea rooms or dining rooms, but also a cigarette vendor. But my favourite thing about that sign is they say catering for parties, bean feast. And so I had to look up this word bean feast because I was intrigued by that. And it turns out that a bean feast was an end-of-year do for staff. You know, works do, summer party or Christmas party, whatever you call it.
These adverts entice you into remembering how things used to be. Advertising designer Brendan McGrath works in the modern world, but his loft is an emporium of nostalgia, with model trains trundling past miniature ghost signs that he has made.
I started by creating some ghost signs for my own train set that I built with our children, and it was from there that I decided that I could make a very small commercial enterprise producing them for fellow railway modellers. I think one of the things about railway modelling is to make the situation as characterful as possible, and I think that's one of the things that the ghost signs provide, is that extra sense of place.
Brendan's train set made me think of an age where life moved at a much slower and thoughtful pace, and he reckons that's exactly what these signs are about.
I think the interesting thing is that the ghost signs were very much considered to be semi-permanent fixtures. They would have been painted and painted over, often just with simple brand messages, whereas today's advertising is much more fast-moving, changes frequently. That constant change of new products, new brands is quite relentless, and I think that is perhaps something that the ghost signs give us a certain amount of nostalgia.
Are there more still to be found? Are we still discovering them?
Yeah, this is one of the funny things, is that a lot of development that takes place can actually destroy ghost signs. So maybe a building gets knocked down where there was a ghost sign on it, or a building gets built next to one and covers it up. So we lose them all the time, and people get very upset and angry about that. But the same types of development can actually allow us to see them for the first time, or for the first time in a long time. A great example is at the junction of Tottenham Court Road and Oxford Street, where the Crossrail development has been happening, a big new railway line in London. And as part of that, a whole swathe of buildings were knocked down, and just behind all of them on Oxford Street is this fantastic old sign for Veglio and Co Cafe, established 1854. And it takes you right back to what was probably a humble Italian cafe there on the fringes of Soho. So yes, they're always becoming visible and present again.
Often councils or developers will remove them, not aware of their significance. But here in Stoke Newington, one cafe owner wasn't letting his go. Is it true that this sign is only here because of you?
Partly, yes. Hackney Council, a number of years ago, sent us an injunction to remove the so-called graffiti off the walls. And I looked around, I thought, where's the graffiti? I was looking for tagging, but there was no tagging. There was just these beautiful ghost signs, and that's what they were calling graffiti. So I sent them a letter, made it very clear, and they, thank God, stopped doing it. But they did remove quite a few around here.
But the good news is they are becoming fashionable again, and new ones are being painted, like this colourful delight on the side of a canal-side pub in Westbourne Grove.
It took us about a week to do. We painted it broken so, which is dry brush, so it's a bit of a faded look to it to begin with. Then once that was finished, we then took the colours of the brickwork behind and we aged over the top of it.
And whilst you were doing this, was there a lot of fascination from locals?
There was quite a bit actually. When we started, we was getting questioned why we was painting it out, which was quite funny. And then towards the end, there was an old chap that had lived in the area all his life and remarked that he'd never noticed it in all the times he'd walked past the pub.
How long will that take to fade, do you think?
Well, going by most ghost signs, I'd imagine as long as it's not touched, that would probably be around for blimey, could be 100 years, I reckon.
What I really like about these is that they fade and grow old gracefully. And it seems that with some help from skilled modern-day sign writers, there might be a whole lot more for future generations to watch grow old and fade. Living history on our streets.